My daughter-in-law brought the document on a Sunday afternoon in April, printed and folded, and placed in an envelope that had already been opened, which told me she had read the document many times before she brought it to me, and that the reading had produced the conviction required to bring it. "It's straightforward," Priscilla said. She set it on the coffee table in front of me with the specific movement of someone who is placing something where it needs to be rather than offering it. "It simply formalizes what everyone understands, that the estate should be managed appropriately rather than left in arrangements that could be difficult to administer." I looked at the document without picking it up. I could read the first page from where I was sitting, which is consistent with having spent 42 years reading scientific literature and legal text, and the accumulated documentation of a research career, which trains the eye to process text at 8. The first page was a will. My name at the top. As the testator. The beneficiary name throughout was Priscilla Ann Ashford, which is my daughter-in-law's name without the hyphenation of her marriage to my son, James. The estate, the house in Cambridge, the investment accounts, the laboratory equipment in the garage, the intellectual property associated with my patents, was directed entirely to her. "Just sign it quickly," Priscilla said. "You don't have much longer to live anyway, and the sooner this is sorted." I looked at her. She had the expression of a woman who has said something she did not intend to say aloud, and who is deciding whether to acknowledge the saying or continue as though it had not been said. She chose the latter. "The sooner this is sorted, the less everyone has to worry about." "You'd like me to sign this," I said. "It's the sensible thing," she said. I looked at the document for a moment. Then I said, "I'll need a pen." "I have one," she said, producing it. "I'd prefer to use my own," I said. I went to the desk slowly, because I'm 78 years old and my hip makes the transition from sitting to standing require acknowledgement. And I opened the drawer and I took out the pen that has been in the right drawer of my desk since in 2019. The pen is a standard Mont Blanc form factor, retrofitted with a cartridge of my own formulation. I had made the cartridge in the laboratory in the garage in 2019, when I had understood the direction that certain developments in my household were taking, and had concluded that a specific preparation would be useful to have available. I came back to the coffee table. I uncapped the pen. I signed. "Thank you," Priscilla said, with the warmth of someone who has received something she was not entirely certain she would receive. She took the document and folded it, and put it back in the envelope and put the envelope in her bag. "The notary closes at 5, she said. "The notary's office is closed on Sundays," I said. She looked at her watch. "Of course. Monday, then. First thing." "Of course," I said. She left. I put the pen back in the desk drawer. I made tea. I sat with the tea and I waited for the warmth it produced, and I thought about the formulation in the pen, which I had used only twice before, once in 2020 to test it, and once in 2021 to make a small adjustment to the pH buffer that extended the pH buffer disappearance window to 24 hours more reliably than the original version had managed. The 24 hours would begin when the ink met the air, which had happened when I signed. It was 3:30 on a Sunday afternoon. By 3:30 Monday afternoon, there would be nothing on that document except the words Priscilla had typed. "My name is Dr. Eleanor Vivian Ashford Nkrumah. I am 78 years old. I hold a PhD from Cambridge in organic chemistry with a specialization in dye chemistry and ink formulation, and I was a senior research fellow at the Medical Research Council's laboratory in Cambridge for 31 years, and I hold 4 patents in all the field of specialty ink formulation for medical and industrial applications. The ink in the pen is the most personally relevant application of my professional expertise." I drank my tea. "I want to explain the ink before I explain the rest, because the ink is the technical center of the story, and because the chemistry deserves precision. An ink that disappears within a defined period is not a new idea. The general category is called thermochromic or photochromic ink, inks that change their visible properties in response to temperature or light, and various formulations have been in commercial use for decades, most famously in the novelty pen sector and in certain anti-counterfeiting applications. The ballpoint pen that produces text which disappears when heat is applied is a well-known example used in examination contexts in several countries. These commercial formulations have limitations that are relevant to my purposes. Most thermochromic inks require a specific temperature to become invisible, which means they can be made visible again by cooling. The text is not gone, merely colorless at ambient temperature. For legal purposes, this is insufficient. A document signed with a thermochromic ink that becomes visible again under refrigeration is a signed document, and any court would treat it as one. What I needed was different. An ink whose disappearance was irreversible within the defined period. Not temperature sensitive, not light sensitive in the simple photochromic sense. Chemically decomposing. The principle I used is the controlled oxidative decomposition of an organic chromophore, the component of a dye molecule that produces its color. Most chromophores are susceptible to oxidation, which disrupts the conjugated electron system that absorbs visible light and produces color. When the conjugated system is disrupted, the molecule stops absorbing the wavelengths that make it appear colored, and the ink becomes transparent. The challenge is controlling the rate of the oxidation. In most inks, oxidation is either very slow, the fading that antique documents show over decades, or is accelerated by environmental factors that are not reliably controlled. What I needed was an oxidation that proceeded at a specific rate, independent of ambient conditions within normal indoor ranges, producing complete transparency within approximately 24 hours of application. I spent 8 months on the formulation in 2019. The laboratory in the garage is fully equipped for this kind of work. I maintained it after my retirement from the MRC because the laboratory is where I think. And the thinking does not stop when the employment does. The formulation required the synthesis of a specific chromophore with a tailored oxidative sensitivity, combined with a buffer system that maintained the pH range within which the oxidation proceeded at the target rate, suspended in an aqueous glycerol vehicle adjusted for proper ink viscosity and flow properties. The two tests, 2020 and 2021, confirmed the formulation's reliability. The 2020 test produced complete disappearance at 18 hours, which was within the 24-hour window, but did not provide sufficient buffer against variables. The 2021 pH adjustment extended the reliable window to 22 hours, with complete disappearance confirmed before 24 hours in all test conditions. I had not expected to use it. I had developed it in 2019 because the developments I was observing in my household made the existence of such a formulation prudent, and because the development process was itself intellectually interesting. The problem of controlled oxidative decomposition at ambient temperature and humidity was a technically demanding problem, and technically demanding problems are what I have always found most engaging. I had hoped, for 3 years after the development, that the prudent preparation would remain unused. Priscilla's document had given me the occasion to use it. The real will had been at Barclays' private banking division in Cambridge since 2018. This is where wills should be, in the care of a professional institution with the legal authority and the physical security to maintain a document that will be significant after the person who made it can no longer speak on its behalf. I had been a Barclays private banking client since 1987, when my first patent licensing income had made the relationship appropriate, and the will had been discussed with the private banking relationship manager and with the solicitor she had recommended, a woman named Helen Pratchett, whose practice specializes in estate matters and whose attention to the details that matter in estate documents is exactly what estate documents require. Helen had helped me draft the will in 2018, and the draft had been revised in 2020 and again in 2022 because wills are not static documents, and the people in them and the circumstances around them change. The 2022 version was the current version, executed, witnessed, and held securely. The 2022 will distributed the estate as follows. The house in Cambridge to be held in trust for the benefit of my 2 grandchildren. James and Priscilla's children, Oliver, who was 16, and Sophia, who was 13. Until they each reached 25, with the trust income available for their education and welfare. The investment accounts divided equally between Oliver and Sophia with the same conditions. The laboratory equipment and intellectual property to the Medical Research Council's laboratory where the equipment could be most usefully employed, and the patent's licensing royalties during the remaining years of their terms to flow into the trust for Oliver and Sophia's benefit. Priscilla was not mentioned in the 2022 will. She had been mentioned briefly and with conditions in the 2018 version, when the marriage was still in a period that appeared to warrant the inclusion. By 2020, the conditions had not been met, and the mention had been removed. By 2022, the absence was entirely deliberate. James, my son, 49 years old, who works in finance, and who has the specific quality of a man who loves his mother and his wife, and who has spent 10 years choosing not to see the tension between those 2 loves, was not a primary beneficiary in the will. I had left him a specific personal bequest, the collection of scientific papers and correspondence that represents the intellectual record of my career, which I believed James would value because he had always been interested in the history of my work, even when the work itself was not his field, and which would be meaningless to Priscilla, and should not be dispersed to an institution that would not know what it was. The will was at Barclays. Helen had a copy. I had a copy in my own locked filing cabinet. The absence of any other current valid will was the condition that Priscilla was trying to address by having me sign the document she had brought on Sunday. Her information was that the will I had was old or informal, or could be challenged. Her information was wrong. What she did not know was that the will was a professional document, properly executed and held by a professional institution, which would be produced at my death by the bank's own processes, rather than by anything Priscilla did or did not do. The invisible ink pen was the appropriate response to the gap between what she believed and what was true. I came to chemistry through the specific accident of a secondary school teacher who was genuinely good at his subject. Mr. Bartholomew, who taught chemistry at the grammar school in Sheffield, and who had the quality of teachers who love their subject and who allow the love to be visible, which is the quality that produces scientists rather than people who studied science. He had showed us in the 3rd year a demonstration with indicator dyes, the classic pH indicator experiment where the color of the solution changes with the addition of acid or base, the red litmus becoming blue, the phenolphthalein becoming blue, the phenolphthalein becoming pink cat. I was 14 years old, and I had the specific response that some 14-year-olds have to chemistry demonstrations. Not wonder at the magic of it, which is the common response, but curiosity about the mechanism. Not what happened, but why. Not the color change, but the molecular explanation for the color change. The molecular explanation for color change was the beginning of a career. I pursued the question from the grammar school through the undergraduate degree at Manchester and through the PhD at Cambridge, which I began in 1968 under a supervisor named Professor Donald McIntyre, who had spent his career on the physical chemistry of dye molecules and whose laboratory was the specific environment in which the question I had been asking, since I was 14, could receive the sustained investigation it deserved. The PhD produced the first of what would eventually be 4 patents, a method for synthesizing a class of chromophores with improved light fastness properties, which meant that certain classes of colored textiles retained their color longer under UV exposure. The patent licensing income was the income that had made the Barclays relationship appropriate. At the MRC laboratory, from 1972 to 2003, the research focus shifted from textile applications to medical ones. The development of specialty inks and dyes for biomedical imaging and diagnostic applications, where the specific properties of ink formulations intersect with the biological systems they are used to observe. The 3 subsequent patents were all in this area. a fluorescent tracer dye for surgical use, a contrast agent for a specific MRI application, and an ink formulation for use in diagnostic test strips that produced a visible signal within a specific time window. The time window ink, patent number 4 from 1998, was the most directly relevant precursor to the invisible ink in the desk drawer. The diagnostic test strip application required an ink that produced a clear visible signal within a defined period, and then faded to a neutral color after the observation window had closed, to prevent false positive readings. The mechanism was the controlled oxidative decomposition that I subsequently adapted for the desk pen formulation. The adaptation took longer than it might have because the requirements were different. The diagnostic strip ink needed to fade within minutes, not hours, and needed to function in the specific chemical environment of the test strip matrix. The desk pen ink needed to persist for a specific period, long enough to appear as a genuine signature, long enough to be taken to a notary, not so long that the disappearance was delayed beyond the planned window, and needed to function in the open air applied to ordinary paper without the controlled environment of a diagnostic strip. The 8 months of development in 2019 were among the most technically interesting of my retirement. This is not a pleasant thing to say. The development was motivated by the direction of events in my household rather than by intellectual curiosity alone. But it was true. The problem was real, and the solution required genuine chemical innovation. The two are not separable. I had retired from the MRC in 2003, but the laboratory in the garage had not retired. The laboratory continued because the thinking continued, and the thinking had produced. Since 2003, 2 smaller publications in academic journals, and the desk pen formulation, and the ongoing engagement with the questions that 42 years of professional research had not fully answered. A retired chemist is a chemist. The retirement is from the institutional role, not from the chemistry. My son James married Priscilla Ann Holbrook in 2001, when he was 30 and she was 27. The marriage had the quality, in its early years, that most marriages have in their early years when both parties are presenting themselves to each other and to the world with the specific warmth of people who are in the process of becoming something. Together, Priscilla is, in the present tense, intelligent and organized and possessed of the specific quality of someone who knows what she wants and who moves steadily toward what she wants without being theatrical about the moving. These are not bad qualities. They become problematic when what is wanted is something that belongs to someone else, and the movement toward it disregards the someone else. I had observed the direction of the want gradually over the course of the marriage, in the way that I observe things with full attention, without premature conclusion, waiting for the pattern to be complete before naming it. The pattern completed itself by approximately 2016, when a conversation about the Cambridge house, the house in which I live, which has been my house since 1979, which is my house in the full legal and personal sense, revealed that Priscilla legal and personal sense understood the house as the future property of herself and James, rather than as my current property that I had the right to maintain and inhabit as I chose. The misunderstanding of the house's ownership status was not aggressive. It was the misunderstanding of someone who has categorized a situation and is operating on the categorization, who has decided that the elderly mother-in-law in the Cambridge house represents a life stage that will conclude, and a property that will conclude, and a property that will then flow appropriately into the family. But the fundamental question of whose house it was had been resolved clearly in 1979 and had not been revised since, and Priscilla's misunderstanding of it was the misunderstanding of someone who had not asked the question, but who had assumed the answer. I had observed this. I had also observed the ways in which the observation informed subsequent interactions, the specific warmth that Priscilla directed at me across the years. which had the quality of warmth that is maintained with the purpose of maintaining access. Not false warmth, exactly. She is not insincere, she is organized. But warmth that is organized around a specific goal rather than warmth that is an expression of genuine relationship. Oliver and Sophia were different. They are my grandchildren, and they are in the ways that matter, genuinely themselves in my presence. Not performing a relationship, but having one. Oliver at 16 is a serious young man with a specific interest in physics that I find genuinely engaging. We talk about wave-particle duality and the measurement problem and the ways in which quantum mechanics challenges classical notions, observation, and the conversation is the conversation of two people who find the same questions interesting. Sophia at 13 has her grandmother's preference for making things. She is currently interested in photography, which has a direct relationship to diachemistry through the photographic process. And I have been slowly introducing her to Thea, relevant chemistry in ways that she finds interesting without feeling like instruction. She is learning the science without knowing she is learning the science, which is the best way. They are why the will is what it is, and they are why the pen was in the desk drawer. I want to tell you about the 24 hours between the signing and the notary, because the 24 hours have a quality that deserves description. I spent the Sunday evening as I spend most Sunday evenings, reading, which for me means reading scientific literature and the specific crossover publications that translate advanced research for interested non-specialists, which I find useful for maintaining the habit of tracking where the fields I care about are moving. I read for 2 hours. I had dinner. I went to the laboratory for an hour, where I was in the middle of a small project that is not relevant to this story, but that occupied me productively. I did not think extensively about Priscilla and the document during the Sunday evening, because the thinking about it had been done. It had been done in 2019 when I prepared the formulation, and in the hour after Priscilla left when I confirmed my own decision about the right response to the Sunday afternoon. The confirmation of the decision was not the decision itself. The decision itself had been made years before when I understood what kind of preparation was appropriate. I slept. Monday morning I went to the laboratory at 7 as I usually do, and I spent 4 hours on the project I had been working on. At 11:30 I made coffee, and I sat in the kitchen with the coffee, and I did the small calculation. I had been doing approximately once an hour since Sunday afternoon, which was the tracking of where the disappearance would be in its progression. The oxidative decomposition of the chromophore is not instantaneous. It proceeds through intermediate stages. The color fades gradually rather than disappearing all at once, with the specific rate profile determined by the buffer chemistry. At 11:30 Monday morning, 20 hours after the signing, approximately 85% of the chromophore would have decomposed. The signature would be visible as a faint trace. By 1 o'clock, 21 and a half hours after the signing, approximately 92%. By 3:30, 24 hours after the signing, complete. I had not heard from James, which meant Priscilla had not told him about the document yet, or she had told him and he had not called, which meant he was processing the information the way James processes things, privately, until he has determined what he thinks about them. At 2 o'clock, 22 and a half hours after the signing, I called Helen Pratchett. "Eleanor," she said with the warmth of someone who is always glad to hear from me, and who understands that I do not call unless I have a reason. "Helen, I want to let you know that there may be a situation arising in the next day or two relating to the estate. It may be a good moment to confirm with the bank that the current will is on file and that its provisions are as discussed in our last meeting." She said, "Of course, is there anything specific I should be prepared for?" "Someone may present a document and claim it supersedes the current will," I said. "The document, when it is examined, will not be what it appears to be. I am confident in the legal situation, but I want you to be informed." She was quiet for a moment. Helen's thoughtful pause, which I have come to recognize across the years of working together. Understood. The Barclays file is current and the will is properly executed. Shall I contact the bank directly to confirm nothing has changed? Please, I said. And it may also be worth your knowing that there is likely to be an inquiry from someone connected to the estate within the next 24 to 48 hours. She received this. At 3 o'clock Monday afternoon, 23 and a half hours after the signing, I called Barclays. Not the specific call that would produce a formal action. Just a courtesy call to the relationship manager to let him know that questions about the estate might be arriving, and that the will on file was current, and that its execution was without question. He thanked me. He confirmed the will was on file and correctly executed. He asked if there was anything else he could assist with. Not at present, I said. I expect you'll hear from others within the week. I made more coffee. I sat with it. At 3:30 Monday afternoon, 24 hours after the signing, the document in Priscilla's envelope contained no signature of mine. I know what happened at the notary's office from two sources. From James, who told me in the week that followed, and from Priscilla, who told me directly and immediately, in the way that someone who has received a significant shock sometimes tells the person they hold responsible, because the telling is the only action available in the first moments of the shock. She called at 11 on Tuesday morning. The notary's office opened at 9, so she had been there for approximately 2 hours before she called. The paper is blank, she said. I see, I said. The signature is gone. I signed a document you signed yesterday, and the signature is gone. The paper is completely blank. There's nothing there. Her voice had the specific quality of someone who is trying to communicate something they cannot quite believe they are communicating. The voice of someone who has encountered something that their framework for the world does not have a category. For the signature is gone, I said. Yes, she said. What did you do? What was in that pen? An ink formulation I developed myself, I said. A chromophore with a controlled oxidative decomposition rate. The compound breaks down at ambient temperature and humidity, producing complete transparency within 24 hours. It was designed for applications where the visibility of a marking needs to be time-limited. Silence. You? She stopped. Started again. You knew. You knew what you were doing when you signed. Yes, I said. You let me believe. I signed the document you presented, I said, with the pen I chose. The signature was genuine in the sense that I produced it. Whether the signature would produce a valid legal instrument was, as you've discovered, a separate question. This is fraud, she said. The document you brought me on Sunday was fraudulent, I said. It purported to be a new will superseding the existing will that has been in professional custody at Barclays since 2018. The will you brought me was typewritten, unwitnessed, and obtained under conditions that no court would consider appropriate for the execution of a testamentary document. If there was fraud committed on Sunday, it was not by me. The real will, she said, is at Barclays, I said. Helen Pratchett's office has a copy. It was executed in 2022, and it is the valid instrument. And it provides for Oliver and Sophia, I said. In the manner that I have always intended, the house and the investments in trust until they reach 25. The laboratory equipment and intellectual property to the MRC. Is not mentioned, I said. The silence this time was longer. This is because of what I said, she said. Sunday, you don't have much longer to live. I shouldn't have. The will was revised in 2022, I said. What you said on Sunday was not the reason for its provisions. The reason for its provisions is my assessment, over many years, of where my estate should go and why. James will receive the personal papers, I said, the scientific correspondence and publications. He has always been interested in the history of the work, which is a genuine interest. I wanted him to have what he would actually value. He'll side with me on this, she said. He'll contest the will. He may try, I said. Helen Pratchett will advise you both on the probability of success, but I will save you the time and expense. The 2022 will was properly executed, professionally held, and reflects my considered intentions developed over 4 years of thought. A contest would be expensive, lengthy, and unlikely to succeed. She hung up. I made tea. James called that evening. He is not a quick processor. He takes time, which is one of his better qualities when it produces careful thought rather than avoidance. "No," he said. "James," I said. "James," I said. "Priscilla told me what happened," he said. "With the will, with what happened at the notary." "Yes," I said. "The pen," he said. "She told me about the pen." "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Then you knew she was going to bring you something like that." "I thought it was a possibility," I said. "I had the pen in the drawer for 3 years. I hoped I would not need it." "And the will," he said. "The one at Barclays." "It's what she said is accurate." "Yes," I said. "Oliver and Sophia. The house and the investments in trust until they're 25. The laboratory equipment to the MRC. The patents royalties to the trust." "And Priscilla," he said, "is not in the will," I said. "I was direct about this in my conversation with her this morning." "And me," he said. "The papers," I said, "your grandfather's letters and the professional correspondence and the academic publications, the record of the career. I thought you would want them." He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I waited rather than filling the silence. "I do want them," he said finally. "I always wanted to understand the work better than I did. I think the papers would help." "Yes," I said. "That's why they're yours." "Mom," he said, "I want to ask you something directly." "Ask," I said. "Did you know what she was doing before Sunday?" "I knew the direction," I said. "I had been observing it for some time. I did not know specifically that she would bring a document. But the general direction, the understanding of the estate is something that should be managed toward a specific outcome. I had observed that for years." "And you didn't tell me?" he said. "No," I said. "Why not?" "Because telling you," I said, "would have required you to choose between your mother's observation and your wife's intentions. And that choice would have been painful for you and would not have changed the fundamental situation. The fundamental situation was that I needed to protect my estate from an attempt to redirect it, and I had prepared for that protection. Your involvement was not required for the preparation and would have complicated it. But I was left out of something important," he said, "about my own family." "You were protected from something painful," I said. "There is a difference, though I understand why it doesn't feel like one from where you're standing." He was quiet again. "Then she said you don't have much longer to live." "She did say that," I said. "It is not accurate in any clinical sense. My physician would not say so. But it is the kind of thing that people say when they are impatient with an obstacle." "You were an obstacle," he said. It was not an accusation. It was the recognition of something he was only now seeing clearly. "Yes," I said. "I was an obstacle. The estate was the object. I was in the way of it," he said. "I love her." "I know," I said. "That is your situation and yours to navigate. I am not asking you to stop loving her or to choose between us. I am telling you that the estate will go where I have decided it should go, and that this is not negotiable. Beyond that, your marriage is your concern and not mine." "You're being very calm about this," he said. "I'm always calm," I said. "It is a professional habit. When you work in chemistry, the appropriate response to any situation is careful observation, careful preparation, and careful execution. The excitement, if there is any, comes in the execution. After the execution, there is equanimity. He was quiet. Then, the pen. How long did it take you to develop that? 8 months, I said. It worked exactly as planned, he said. Yes, I said. The chemistry was correct. I told Oliver and Sophia about the will in May at the specific occasion of the Sunday lunch that I host on the last Sunday of each month. The lunch that has been the specific form of my relationship with my grandchildren since they were old enough to enjoy a proper Sunday lunch and to have the kind of conversation that a proper Sunday lunch with their grandmother produces. I told them in the way that I tell them significant things, directly, in terms they can receive, with the full account rather than the protected version, because I believe that young people deserve honest information about the things that affect them rather than the version that adults have decided is appropriate for their age. Oliver, at 16, received the information with the specific quality of attention he brings to anything that interests him, the full focus, the absence of distraction, the processing that is visible in the quality of his subsequent questions. He asked, "The ink, what was the decomposition mechanism?" I told him about the chromophore and the oxidative decomposition and the buffer chemistry and the rate profile. He asked 3 follow-up questions, each of which was precise and indicated genuine understanding of the previous answer. By the end of the explanation, he had a correct working model of what the chemistry was and why it worked. "You developed this in 2019, he said. "Yes," I said, "because you were already expecting something like what happened," he said. "I was preparing for the possibility," I said. "The distinction matters. I did not know what would happen. I knew what might happen, and I made appropriate preparation." "That's chemistry," he said. "That's chemistry," I agreed. "And it is also the attitude that is useful in most situations. You observe what is happening. You consider what might be required. You prepare the appropriate response. You wait for the occasion that requires the response. You execute when the occasion arrives. He absorbed this, then. And the will, the trust. Until we're 25. Until you're 25, I said. The trust is managed by Barclays until then. The income is available for your education and welfare during the period of the trust. At 25, you and Sophia each receive your shares outright." "Why 25?" he said. "Because 25, I said, is the age at which most people have made enough decisions to have some sense of what kind of decisions they make. At 16, you are a person of genuine promise and good judgment. At 25, I expect you to be a person who has encountered enough of the world to know what to do with a significant inheritance." The 9 years are not distrust. They are respect for the person you will become. Sophia had listened to this without interrupting, which is consistent with Sophia. At 13, she has the specific quality of a quiet person who is processing rather than being quiet. And the processing is usually more thorough than the speech of someone who jumps in immediately. She said, "Grandmother, the pen." "Yes," I said. "You put the invisible ink in a pen you kept in the desk drawer," she said. "For 3 years." "Yes," I said, "because you thought someday you would need it," she said. "Because I thought someday I might need it," I said. "And you made the ink yourself," she said. "Yes," I said. "Can you show me?" she said. "Not the same, not the one you used. A new one. Can you show me how to make a different kind? Like with a different disappearance time?" I looked at my granddaughter across the Sunday lunch table. "Next Saturday," I said. "We'll start with the basics of chromophore structure. The rest follows naturally." She nodded. Oliver nodded. The Sunday lunch continued. The months from May to October had the quality of months during which a significant thing has happened and is being absorbed by the people it has happened to and around. each at their own pace and in their own way. Helen Pratchett had the conversation with James and Priscilla that the circumstances produced. The conversation about the legal situation, about the validity of the 2022 will, about the impossibility of successfully contesting a professionally executed estate document on the basis of what had happened on Sunday. Helen told me afterward that the conversation had been calm, and that James had been cooperative, and that Priscilla had been, by the end, accepting of the situation in the way that someone accepts a situation when the alternative is expensive and unlikely to succeed. James called me in June, which was a month after the Sunday lunch conversation and approximately 6 weeks after the document incident. He called not about the estate. He had processed that in his slow and private way and had arrived at an acceptance that I believed was genuine. But about Priscilla, he said, "We've been talking." He said, "We've been talking." About what she was doing and why. Yes, I said. She was honest about it, he said, more honest than I expected. She said she had been looking at the situation with the estate as a financial security question for years, and that she had decided to address it directly. She said she thought you would sign and wouldn't realize what you were signing. Yes, I said, that is an accurate account. She said she underestimated you, he said. Yes, I said. She made assumptions about what I would and would not know based on an incomplete understanding of who I am. She's been different since, he said. I don't know if different is the right word. She's been more honest about the things she's been organizing around. It's not comfortable, but it's more real. Honesty is often uncomfortable, I said. This is one of the reasons it is undervalued. Will you see her? He said. At some point. When things have settled. James, I said, I am always available to see my son and his wife. The estate is settled and the situation is what it is. If Priscilla wants to have a relationship that is based on what is actually true, rather than on the performance of warmth toward an obstacle, that is a relationship I am willing to have. That's quite demanding, he said. Yes, I said. Yes, I said. I am quite demanding. I am also 78 years old, and I've been looking at things closely for more than 50 years. And what I know is that relationships based on what is true are more durable and more worth having than relationships based on what appears to be true. The demand is for the real thing. It is the most reasonable demand available. He thought about this. She said something, he said. About the ink. She said it was ruthless. It was precise, I said. Precision and ruthlessness are different things. A surgeon who makes an incision exactly where the incision needs to be made is not being ruthless. She is being precise. What I did was chemically precise. The chemistry produced the outcome the chemistry was designed to produce. And the outcome the chemistry was designed to produce, he said, was the protection of your estate and Oliver and Sophia's inheritance. Yes, I said, exactly that. The saying I used in the conversation at the bank, which Priscilla had called me about 3 days after the Tuesday call, to ask whether I would reconsider the provisions of the will was, chemistry can create color. And it can also erase greed. I want to be honest about this. The saying was prepared. I had been thinking about it for the 3 years the pen was in the drawer, in the way that a person who has prepared a response thinks about how the response will be communicated when the occasion arrives. The chemistry of the phrase, the balance of the two clauses, the way creation and erasure mirror each other, was the kind of formulation that satisfies the scientific mind, which, like symmetry and parallel structure, it was also true. Chemistry does create color. The entire field of dye chemistry and colorimetry exists because of the human desire to produce, preserve, and control color, which is one of the oldest forms of human technology and one of the most continuously important. And chemistry can erase what appears to be color, or what appears to be a signature, or what appears to be a legal instrument, when the chemistry is correctly designed to do so. The greed formulation was the addition that made the saying personal, rather than merely technical. Priscilla's attempt to redirect the estate was an instance of the kind of thinking that treats other people's property as a resource to be acquired, rather than as an expression of those people's lives and intentions. This kind of thinking is common, and I have never been able to determine whether it is more a product of character, or circumstance, or some combination that the social sciences have not yet fully characterized. What the chemistry could erase was not the greed itself, which is a condition of the person rather than of the document. What the chemistry could erase was the specific expression of the greed in the document. The signature that would have made the fraudulent will appear valid. Without the signature, the document was blank paper, which it had essentially been from the beginning. A will that reflected no one's genuine intentions, except those of the person who typed it, which was not me. Sophia has been in the laboratory every Saturday since May. She has learned the basics of chromophore structure and the concept of the conjugated pi system that produces color and the general category of reactions that disrupt that system. She is methodical and patient, which are the two most important qualities for laboratory work, and she asks questions with the specific precision of someone who is genuinely trying to understand, rather than someone who is performing understanding. She asked me in July, "Grandmother, did you ever think about not making the ink?" "Yes," I said. "Why did you make it?" "Because preparation for a possible situation," I said, "is more effective than reaction to an actual one." If I had waited for the Sunday and then tried to respond without preparation, the response would have been slower and more difficult, and might not have achieved what the preparation achieved. "The 8 months," she said. "The 8 months," I said. "The chemistry required time. I gave it time. The time was available because the preparation was early. Is that always how chemistry works?" she said. "The best chemistry," I said, "always involves giving the time that is needed. Reactions cannot be rushed past the point where they are complete. You can increase temperature and pressure to affect rates, but there are limits, and the limits are set by the chemistry itself rather than by your impatience." She wrote this in her notebook, which she keeps in the laboratory. "The same as life," she said. "Often," I said, "though life has more variables than a controlled reaction, and the rates are harder to predict." She nodded and went back to the experimental setup we were running. The Saturday afternoons in the laboratory are the best part of my current week. I am 78 years old. The laboratory is still in the garage. The pen, the one with the invisible ink cartridge, is still in the desk drawer, because the cartridge is not depleted by a single use, and because the prudent preparation, once made, should remain available. The will is at Barclay's. Helen Pratchett's office has a copy. Oliver and Sophia will receive the estate when the time comes, in the manner I have specified. The trust will manage the assets until they are 25. The laboratory equipment and the intellectual property will go to the MRC, where they can continue to be useful in the way that scientific equipment is useful, in the hands of people who are doing the work the equipment is designed for. James has dinner with me on the first Sunday of each month, sometimes with Priscilla and sometimes without, depending on the specific circumstances of that month. When Priscilla comes, the conversation is different from what it was before Sunday, more honest, less performing, with the specific quality of a relationship that knows it has been seen clearly and that has decided to operate accordingly. I find this preferable. Oliver is applying to universities in the autumn. He is considering physics and mathematics, which are the right fields for a mind that has his specific quality, and I have been corresponding with a colleague at Cambridge who is in the relevant department and who would be the right person for Oliver to speak with if he is accepted. The correspondence is professional and the recommendation is genuine. Oliver is the kind of student who earns recommendations rather than receiving them as gifts. What do I know at 78, after 42 years of professional chemistry and 31 years at the MRC, and the 8 months of the desk pen formulation, and the Sunday afternoon in April? I know that chemistry is a discipline of observation, preparation, and patience. You observe what is happening in the system. You understand the mechanism. You prepare the response that the mechanism will require. You wait for the conditions that call for the response. You execute when the conditions arrive. The execution, if the preparation has been correct, is simple. The simplicity of the execution is the evidence that the preparation was thorough. The signature was the execution. The 8 months of preparation made the execution simple. I uncapped the pen. I signed my name. I put the pen back in the drawer. The chemistry did the rest. I know that the correct response to an attempt to misrepresent what is true is to make the truth visible, not by force, not by confrontation, but by creating the conditions in which the truth cannot be concealed. A blank document is a very clear truth. A document signed with invisible ink that disappears is a very clear statement about what the document was, and about what the person who presented it intended, and about what the appropriate response was. I know that the question of what we leave and to whom is one of the most important questions we answer in the course of a life, and that the answer should reflect genuine thought about genuine values rather than the path of least resistance. The easiest thing on the Sunday afternoon would have been to sign with a real pen and to deal with the consequences later. The consequences would have been legal, expensive, and uncertain. The preparation I had made was a better response. I know that Sophia is going to be a scientist. She does not know this yet. She is 13, and the question of what she is going to be is a question she is still approaching with the open curiosity of someone who has not yet committed to a direction. But the Saturday afternoons in the laboratory have the quality of afternoons that are pointing in a direction, and the direction they are pointing is science. And I find this the most satisfying outcome of the entire episode. Chemistry can create color. Chemistry can also erase greed. Both statements are true, and both are instances of the same principle, that the world at the molecular level is governed by mechanisms that can be understood, and once understood, can be directed towards specific ends. The understanding is the thing. The patience to apply the understanding is the thing after the thing. I have been practicing both for 50 years. I expect to practice them for some years more.